From the WATE.com Digital Center, answering your legal questions. This is Ask Isaacs. Now, here's Lori Tucker and attorney Greg.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Lori Tucker here, along with our legal analyst, Greg Isaacs, on this first day of early voting, Greg. Election season is here.
It is upon us.
Yes, it is. And so here we go. From now until the 31st, you can cast your vote early. What we're going to talk about today are some of the voting laws, voting in East Tennessee and Tennessee, and some of the races that are up for grabs, most notably the White House.
I've heard.
We're picking a president.
We're picking a president. And, you know, Lori, it's unfortunate, but we can't talk about elections and voting laws without talking about voter fraud.
Sadly, it's something that comes up every election cycle. Tennessee, though, has had its fair share of some cases, although in Knox County, not so much. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Well, let's do, because if you turn on some of the news stations, you would think that voter fraud is rampant everywhere you turn. But, you know, it's interesting when you kind of do a deep dive on some of the facts on voting in Tennessee. Tennessee ranks 46th in voter turnout, so we do a very poor job of getting people to the polls.
It's so disappointing, and that number has not changed in quite a bit.
Well, it might be because of this. Tennessee is the 13th most difficult state to vote.
And why is that?
I don't know. That's a good question, because, you know, when you look at our laws, they don't look that overwhelming on how you vote, and we'll talk about some of them. But the other thing is, what is interesting, when I said voter fraud is not as rampant as one may think, in 2016, Tennessee had the most verified complaints of voter fraud in the nation.
Yes.
And out of 4.3 million votes cast in the state of Tennessee, 40 verified cases of voter fraud. That was number one in the nation. The Election Commission has not referred a case of voter fraud to the Knox County Attorney General's office since 2020.
There you go.
There you go.
And what does that say to people about voter fraud in this country?
It probably changes no one's mind or opinion, and they'll probably say they just haven't been caught yet. But you know, the statistics are really interesting and significant when you talk about all of the different dynamics and how Tennessee fits into this national debate. And you know, when you live here and you're looking at it from the inside out, you know, I would have never thought Tennessee was 46th in voter turnout in the United States. When you look at the mountain states, you look at rural states, I would have thought voter fraud would have been more prolific, with people, you know, registering, not registered to vote in this county, voting in that county.
Well, and just looking at the outcry on social media, Facebook alone, you would think, are these people voting? Are they not? Are they just
they're
talking?
Yeah.
What's happening?
But early voting in Tennessee runs from today, the October 16th, and it ends October 31st. We have, when you start getting into the mechanics of voting, then you get into the mechanics and the law of voter fraud. And in Tennessee, you can ask for an absentee ballot. You have to be over 60, or you have to have an infirmity, an illness. You have to prove that you reside out of state or that you're a student.
And you got to get that in the mail.
Important. Well, not only do you have to get it in the mail, some states go by the postmark and have a cutoff of so many days after the polls close. Not in Tennessee, and that's maybe why we're number 13 in difficulty to vote. The absentee ballot has to be received by the close of polls. So at 8 o'clock on November 5th, 4th, whatever it falls on this year, the 5th, which is kind of counterintuitive to say, if that ballot is not received by the Election Commission, your vote doesn't count.
It's not midnight. It's close of the polls.
And let me tell you, and those absentee ballots are very closely monitored. It is a crime under Tennessee law for someone other than the Election Commission to provide an absentee ballot to somebody. If you request an absentee ballot, you can't go vote. You can't change your mind and go, well, I just decided to move back to Tennessee, or my illness or infirmity is much better. You can't do it. So those absentee ballots are very strictly scrutinized. but it's not the postmark, it's when it's received by the Election Commission.
There you go. And you know, you could get in a lot of trouble, like you were just talking about. There is highlighted language that says you may actually be eligible for a reward. You could get $1,000 if you turn somebody in, if you know of voter fraud that leads to a conviction.
And that's one of my kind of favorite anecdotes under Tennessee law when we talk about voter fraud. If you've requested your absentee ballot, carefully at the bottom, it says you could get a reward up to $1,000 if somebody you report them and they are convicted of voter fraud.
Goodness, here we go. Okay, let's go talk about the day itself, or the time period itself, when we talk about early voting, who we're voting for, who's on the ballot. Obviously, early voting allows people to cast their ballots at any early voting locations. So even though you may be set for Election Day itself at a certain polling location, you can go anywhere. Downtown West is very popular. A lot of people do that. And there are some other places, the Knoxville Expo Center, the UT Baker School of Public Policy and Public Affairs on UT's campus, that's another one. They generally open at 8, they close around 6 or 7, depending. If you're in line, you still get to vote.
Typically you do. And let's talk about qualifications to vote. And it's very broad, and you know, that's why I think there's a lot of misconceptions about voter fraud. Anyone that is a United States citizen over the age of 18 and is a resident of the state where they intend to vote shall have the right to vote unless they are disqualified.
And let's talk about what disqualifies them. We've spoken about that at length
Well,
in the past.
the big disqualification typically is the F word, and that is a felony conviction. And it's
I didn't know where you were going at first.
It's amazing how many people try to vote and they say, oops, I thought it might not have been a felony, it was years ago.
I didn't know I was infamous in the court system.
Yeah, I thought I filed a paper to get it taken care of, and I'm going to tell you, they move swiftly, they being the Election Commission prosecutors, when someone votes and they're not qualified. Another big issue is citizenship. There's been recently some people that were not U.S. citizens received mail-in ballots, whatever, inadvertently, and those are being policed very rigorously by government. But basically, it's very broad. If you are a U.S. citizen, you have a right to vote in that state unless you're disqualified, and typically a felony conviction is something that does it. But it's amazing time and time again where people after the fact say, well, I forgot, or I didn't realize it being my conviction was a felony.
You forgot you had a felony.
Forgot you had a felony. Now, you know, it's also interesting when we go to that verbiage on the bottom of an absentee ballot where you have up to a $1,000 reward if you turn someone in.
And it leads to a conviction.
Leads to a conviction. But, you know, Tennessee also changed the law recently regarding crossover voting in primaries. And the law indicated that it is a felony, a serious felony, and depending on how they interpreted it, it could have been an E felony 1 to 2 years or a D felony 2 to 4 years if you vote in a primary and you are not a, quote, bona fide member of that party.
That scared
that's
so
such
many
a great
people
Tennessee
to death.
word, a bona fide member
Bona
of that
fide, not bona fide, bona fide.
Or at the time that you're voting in the primary, you declare your allegiance to that political party.
In front of everybody.
Well, no one really knows how you do that.
That's kind of the thought process we had. If you have to stand there and say publicly, people are going to hear, they're going to know your business.
I hereby pledge allegiance to the United Party of whatever. But, you know, interestingly, former Mayor and Ambassador Victor Ashe and some others filed a lawsuit in federal court challenging the constitutionality of that law. A lot of observers and pundits, including myself, thought, you know, that lawsuit has great potential, and it's really interesting when you have a high-profile lawsuit. It kind of comes in with a bang, and it kind of ends sometimes with a whimper.
Well, there were 2 lawsuits filed, right? One was dismissed.
It was in the United States District Court. It's heard in Nashville. The first one was dismissed for lack of standing, and what the federal court said was basically you can't prove that you were damaged or were going to be damaged, plaintiffs Victor Ashe and others, by failing to say you're a bona fide member of a party or declaring your allegiance. So they had, as you were required when you challenge the constitutionality of a statute, named Attorney General Skrmetti in the first one. Well, that got dismissed for lack of standing, so then they stepped back, that happened in May, and add all of the local attorney generals.
And took his name out of there.
Sharm Allen, Ryan Desmond from Blount County. And
Sean McDermott, I think, was on it too, maybe?
Some others. I'm not sure about Sean McDermott.
Maybe not. I thought I saw his name in here. But anyway, Sharm Allen definitely was.
Sharm Allen, and almost as soon as it was filed, it was dismissed again. So the law requiring you to be a bona fide member of a party to vote in a primary or declare your allegiance is still on the books, and I was going to say good law in the state of Tennessee. Let's just call it a law in Tennessee.
A law in Tennessee. All right. Do you think it'll come back? I mean, anybody can file a lawsuit at any time.
I think what you're going to have to wait and see is if somebody is actually prosecuted for being an R voting in a D primary or being a D and voting in an R primary, and then they say I was damaged, or I just had this epiphany and the party left me, I didn't leave the party.
But what kind of damage are we talking about?
Well,
what would you have to prove?
Well,
How far would you have to go?
If you were handcuffed and arrested and hauled out of a polling place and
that
put in
could
jail,
really happen under that?
That could really happen
That's
under
amazing. That's amazing. And we have so many. I know. I just wanted to clarify and have you say those words.
Amazing.
We have talked about people who, especially this cycle, talking about, look, I just want to vote for the person. I'm not voting for the party. I'm voting for the person. So there are a lot of people who paid attention to this.
There are a lot, but again, there's a difference between a primary election and a general election, because the thought behind the legislation was there was a tremendous amount of crossover voting to knock off the stronger candidate in the general election and make them vulnerable. But here it's wide open. It's a general election, and we'll see. But
let's talk about who's in it. We have lots of familiar names, obviously, that you're going to see on the ballot. Obviously, we've got Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. But here in our area...
And others.
There's
always others running for...
others.
And you can write
in...
You can write in somebody that's a U.S. citizen that's qualified.
What are you saying?
Well, you would make a good write-in candidate. Potentially.
Greg Isaacs, okay. People will say, don't quit your day job to me. We have Becky Duncan Massey, versus DeMonica Bryan. That's a pretty big race, obviously, for Tennessee Senate. That represents the eastern part of Knox County. We have Elaine Davis versus Brian Goldberg in the House of Representatives. This is for southwest Knoxville and east Knox County. Marsha Blackburn and Gloria Johnson. That's a big one, although polls show that Blackburn will...
She has a sizable
doing very
lead.
well.
Interesting, after Gloria Johnson, our local rep, was one of the Tennessee Three, she obtained a lot of notoriety and then threw her ring in the hat against Marsha Blackburn, but a very formidable incumbent U.S. Senator, and has I think, as you said, a commanding lead in the polls.
Now, that doesn't mean Gloria Johnson is going to disappear from politics, because, interestingly enough, she is still...
And I'm not going to comment too much because of... he's a friend of mine. Tim Burchett is running again, and I'm not going to comment too much because of... he's a friend of mine. Tim Burchett is running against...
Jane George.
I wanted to not mispronounce her name. So, a lot of important... Well, basically all elections are important. And exercising your right to vote is important. But, to me, when you talk about the law, voter fraud, etc., the real issue in Tennessee is not the prevalence of voter fraud or whatever. It's the fact that we don't vote. So, legally, I think we should kind of focus on what your right is, when you vote, how you vote, where you vote. And it's really not an issue of who you vote for. It's to keep the process viable, vibrant, healthy. So, that's it. Being qualified to vote, it's your inalienable right when you're born or you become a U.S. citizen. Hard to get disqualified, but you know, if you are a convicted felon, that is the main kicker. Do not vote because it is a very serious crime.
Yeah.
Um,
One thing that I find very disheartening too, I've heard more than a couple of people say, I'm just not going to vote. I don't like either one for president. I'm not going to vote. That's
well, the adage, I'm not going to vote, it is my vote, that's not your vote.
yeah.
Because things will never change unless people exercise that right to vote.
Right.
And once you see the system atrophy, I think there's a danger that it can become vulnerable.
Yeah.
So, you know, we got a very important right that people lived and fought and died for in this country.
That's so true.
You know, when you do exercise that right, do it with pride. I know sometimes it's a pain if you wait to the last minute and it's raining, or you drive by that school that is now a de facto polling place and the lines are long. But you know, every time when I do vote, you always come away, I think, with a good feeling
Yeah.
for having done it, because that's how our government works.
Indeed it is. Let's talk more at 5:30.
Let's do.
All right. Thanks for joining us.